out of classroom experiences, and so we know what it's like to be in your shoes, and we are here for you. This series is part of that Copyright Unlock. There's wonderful webinars that Brandon has really done an excellent job in curating with different national organizations. And the reason that we're doing that is because we know that we have to support the field with our new Create 2.2 objectives. And this is really in all arts disciplines where we are talking about copyright and ethics and fair use and why does this matter, what's important about this, and when we're borrowing ideas from others, how do we make sure that we are doing it both legally and ethically, and making sure that we're giving credit where credit is due. And so these conversations should now be happening from kindergarten all the way to advanced in our grade levels of all arts disciplines. And so that is the main drive that brings us to this series. As I mentioned, the other ones are now in our professional development catalog. If you want more information on them, you can go there and watch them at your leisure, and you can fill out reflection journals and get CEUs for the time that you spend engaging with them. And so we've got Respect the Work, Copyright and Ethics in Real Careers. That was a panel conversation from our annual conference. We've got Arrange It Right with Alfred Music. Stage Right, which is teaching ethical performance and licensing theater with Music Theater International, and Lesson Launch, looking at different classroom resources with copyright and creativity. And of course, at the end of tonight's session, this recording will also be housed in our professional development catalog so that you can go back and reference it at any time. And please tell your friends and colleagues about it so that they can go and watch it too if they missed this opportunity to join us live. If you are wanting CEU credits for today, or if you are watching this webinar at a later date, then you are going to need your reflection journal. So you do not just automatically get credit for being with us. You do have to complete this as well as the survey at the end. And so you're going to scan this link or type this into a different window. This is go.ncdpi.gov/AOE for Art of Education Journal. And it will force you to make a copy. You're going to want to make sure your permissions are changed to anyone can view, and then you'll be asked to upload that link into the survey at the completion of tonight's webinar in order for you to get your CEU credits. So again, I'll let this just sit for one more minute as you pull up that reflection journal, go.ncdpi.gov/AOE for Art of Education Journal. And this is what it should look like on the first page. And then there are other subsequent pages for you. We're going to go a little fast today. Obviously, if you're watching this at home, we're going to encourage you to pause the video and take more time to complete it. If you're watching it live, you can jot down some notes and then do your best to follow up on those notes and get that survey turned into us, at a time that's convenient for you. Okay. All right. So going on. Our learning outcomes, we want to, by the end of today, we want to make sure that you can identify and apply what we're saying are the 6 key copyright and creativity themes to real classroom scenarios. What does this look like in visual arts classrooms across our state? Be able to explain the fundamentals of copyright, fair use, and ethical creativity as they apply to K-12 visual arts classrooms. Differentiate between originality, copying, attribution, and responsible remixing in student artwork and the creative processes, and be able to locate and access additional professional learning resources through Art of Education as well as NCDPI so that you can extend your classroom practice in support of student understanding and ethical and responsible creative practice. So it's a lot, right? But we'll get through them. Today's agenda is going to look like this. I'm going to kick it off in a second for these wonderful women to introduce themselves to you. Again, this is the Art of Education that is here with us. We'll talk then about what those 6 conceptual bins are, and then go into these classroom scenarios for each of them, and then look at these additional resources that are available to you, and then we'll close out with you at the end of the hour. So, with all of that set aside, welcome Kacie and Aaron. Again, thank you so much for being here, for the amount of time that you have put into preparing this presentation with me. And I'm just going to let you talk a little bit about who you are and your backgrounds. Go ahead.
Thank you, Laura. I am so excited to be here. My name is Kacie Mummert. I am a customer success manager at the Art of Education. Really, my role here is to work behind the scenes with your district leaders to ensure that you have the resources that you need and that you're successful in those resources. I was a visual arts teacher for almost 15 years in a large district just outside of Atlanta, primarily taught 6th through 12th grade. So I'm excited to, share my experience in the classroom, but then also how my role at AOE is here to help support you as teachers and advocate for you. And then I'm joined by Erin Saladino.
Hi, I'm Erin Saladino. I'm the subject matter expert here at Art of Education. I have dedicated my career of 23 plus years to art education both in the elementary and middle school art classroom, as well as district administration for arts education for a very large district in Tampa, Florida, Hillsborough County. Where I supported over 200 art teachers in their art programs. So I consider myself a curriculum specialist, tons of experience in the classroom, and my role here at AOE is to kind of make connections between what art teachers and art administrators need and want based on the experience that I have, and supporting customer success managers and sales managers like Kacie here, and just making those connections so we can find the right fit and right solutions, and making connections here today with you all. So I'm super excited to be here.
Fantastic. All right. So, what are our 6 conceptual bins? What we've done is we've taken the thematic ideas that we see coming in our objectives from kindergarten through advanced. And we're saying the basic things that we're talking about are original versus copying, right? What does this look like? How can students recognize and distinguish the difference between original ideas and those that are borrowed from others? And we see this in grades kindergarten and first grade. Then we get into more legal and ethical sharing, understanding the boundaries of how we can and when we can use certain ideas or images. And that's talked about more in second, fourth, and eighth. When we see attribution and credit, how do we make sure our students are understanding how to give credit and properly cite where these sources of inspiration are coming from, or getting those permissions. And we talk about it as early as first grade and carry that into fifth and advanced. The copyright vocabulary is where we're seeing them learning and comparing some of these more legal terms. Again, we are not lawyers. We're not expecting y'all to be lawyers, but it is important that students have an understanding of what these terms are and what they mean. And so we see that coming a little bit in the later years, sixth grade and beginning. And then our complex use case where we're seeing what parody, and then parody in visual arts might be more of like making memes, right? We're seeing kind of this joking happening with art, the satirical type of things that we might see in cartoons, with AI and with remixing. And we have that happening in our accomplished level. And then our ethical evaluation, where we're judging that appropriateness of how we are using these images and ideas. And we talk about that in third, seventh, and intermediate. And so this is again how we've kind of chunked what the objectives are talking about in this through line. And if you'd like more information, again, you'll have access to this slide deck at the end of the presentation and through the catalog, but this is where you can find more information on those conceptual bins. It's also in your reflection journal that you should have that link. And so you can see more about what those actual objectives are and have this for your own files. Okay. So our welcome activity in the chat is for you just to take a moment and jot down to us, where do you anticipate needing the most support in the types of conversations that you might have with students, or the type of work you might do? So is it in originality versus copying, legal and ethical sharing, attribution and credit, vocabulary, complex use, or ethical use? If you want to just take a moment and drop down for yourself, or maybe it's all of them, and that's fine too. Let us know kind of where do you feel the need a little help here type of support that's going to be needed in these bins. And this is also on your reflection journal. So as you should be completing that for later on. Well, I know for myself, it definitely would be that legal and ethical sharing of like, how do I obtain legal permissions, and what can I do? Why should I do it? Why shouldn't I do it? Those are going to be some really great conversations. So, all right, well, let's keep going. We're going to start with vocabulary. So let's take a look at what this looks like in actual objective language. We want our students to learn these specific terms so that they can classify the types of rights and usage in categories. And so the core idea here is that the students are building that vocabulary to recognize legal distinctions that impact how art can be used, remixed, or protected. So again, we see this in 6th grade and beginning specifically. And in 6th grade, they are describing how fair use, copyright, public domain, open source, and Creative Commons affect art. And in beginning, they have to make comparisons in how adaptation, appropriation, fair use, copyright, public domain, open source, and Creative Commons, it got cut off, impact the art making process, basically. So how do these all work within making art? So when we talk about vocabulary, what is fair use, right? That's just my own personal vignette here. Is I always thought as a teacher, oh, I'm in education, I can just go ahead and use whatever I needed to because it's fair use. My students are using it as an educational study, and I'm not trying to make money off of this, so it should be allowed, right? And only through all of this, research and experience of being here at DPI with these objectives have I even learned that's not the case, right? There are actually 4 principles with fair use: understanding what that purpose is, the nature of it, how much of it you're using, and again, how it might impact the market need for the original. So things, again, that we just have to help our teachers in knowing. And when we've asked the field some of their, ideas in these concepts, a lot of them are like, I don't even know what Creative Commons is, let alone fair use, right? So what can we do? I think the biggest question we're going to start off with is, how can we help teachers support students if they don't even know the vocabulary themselves, right? But how can we go ahead and help them in their support of students in understanding that vocabulary? So I'm going to turn it over to you girls to help explain that. Go ahead.
Sure. So one way that as we were approaching these bins, trying to kind of find both a tangible way for teachers to kind of understand how this looks in the classroom, but also a way to implement, give you a strategy to implement right away. You could use it in your classroom tomorrow, was to kind of look at these little scenarios as little vignettes of what either for myself or for Kacie that we've actually seen or experienced in the classroom and working with students. And then giving you some strategies to kind of approach what a typical challenge could be and how you could use it in your classroom. So for this first bin for vocabulary, we have a scenario. And the scenario is my 6th grade students do not know the difference between adaptation, appropriation, fair use, copyright, public domain, open source, and Creative Commons. So that long vocabulary list that we mentioned in the bin. And for many of you, it could be not only my 6th graders don't know, but I don't know. So we're learning together. So the challenge here for this solution is, or for this scenario is, how do I help them or myself to feel fluent in these terms in order to differentiate between them? So that way they're using them commonly in a conversation within the classroom. So a strategy that you could use that I know that I have used with my students is engaging immersion or in a game. They're playing a game that is infused with the vocabulary that they have to know so they can apply it later. So by creating this game of having a set of cards with different images that represent different examples of the different sources, along with kind of like a short little situation or vignette of what's happening. So an example could be a famous historic painting. You have a Van Gogh painting. You have a Creative Commons image. You have a movie still. A student's drawing that you want to remix or change. So a couple of different examples or visual representations. And then the students get to play. So they divide up into teams where the first group places down an image card into what they believe is the correct category of where that picture of Van Gogh's painting should be. And then the other team either agrees or challenges, but they have to be able to discuss why they think it's in the right or the wrong category. So you as the mediator or the facilitator would help to guide them and make sure that their why is the correct why or their reasoning. But it kind of gets them engaged without it just being them memorizing a list of vocabulary terms. So they're actually using it kind of in context. So, and then we have a supporting resource that could kind of go along with this scenario.
Perfect. So our mission at the Art of Education is that we support teachers at every stage in their career. And so with that, we really want to not just give you, those talking points about each conceptual VIN, but also the resources that are there available to you. So we're going to highlight some free resources that are available to you as we go throughout these scenarios. So the first one being how to deal with copyright, plagiarism, and original ideas in art education. This is a great article available to you. At the end, you'll get a link to all of the resources that we talk about today. But just thinking about, how can we actually define copyright? How can we define plagiarism? Fair use. Laura covered the 4 parts of fair use earlier. And so just really, thinking about making those definitions for students. And like Erin said, finding engaging ways to help them get into those identifiers, and just thinking about that. So this is a great article. We're going to follow it up with a quick reflection question, which Laura's going to lead us into.
So in your reflection journals, again, this may be a time where if you're watching this webinar, to hit pause. If you are with us live, we are going to be moving swiftly. So just jot some notes down for yourself to come back. But the first question we're asking is, okay, we heard about maybe ways to play games, right, within kind of like a debate. Do you agree? Do you disagree? So how might you support the development of your students' understanding of the various terms when speaking about fair and ethical use in the learning environment? And so take a minute, again, pause if you are watching this. Otherwise, kind of jot down some quick notes because we are going to keep moving. All right, so the next one is originality versus copying. So we know that is any idea really original, right? I mean, we always are so inspired by everything that we are seeing. So having to really have those conversations with students. What is the difference between this is my idea versus this is an idea that I am getting from somebody else? And at the early grades, that's really all we're talking about, right? We're not expecting these students to, well, copyright and fair use, right? We don't need that level of conversation with them, but it's simple, well, whose idea is this? Where did it come from, right? To making sure that students are distinguishing between one's own ideas and those that are taken from others, and that they're able to recognize the difference between creating, imitating, and beginning to acknowledge where that source of a work is coming from. And so in kindergarten, we say students must be able to explain the difference between original and copied ideas or works. And in first grade, they're explaining not just when to give credit, but also how. Like, okay, I have to make sure that I'm saying that this is so-and-so's idea, right? And it's, again, we're not saying they've got to cite the gallery of which it started and was premiered, but being able to make sure that they understand the how and when credit is appropriate, okay? So our main question then is, well, how can you tell when inspiration becomes imitation? We know, especially in the early grades, a lot of teachers do the I do, you do, right? And we're all going to do that same project. Of course, we want to see our students having those original ideas, but how do we at least have these conversations with our students about the difference between inspiration and imitation?
And I have a scenario for that. So for this scenario, again, making it tangible, especially when we have this kind of focus towards kindergarten and first grade. A lot of these conversations that we're having are very natural conversations, especially in the art room, around just looking at a piece of artwork and understanding it through art criticism. So if the scenario is kindergartners are making artwork inspired by the classroom artist of the week, who is Basquiat. Okay, so the challenge is, how do I help students see the difference between I am copying this picture and I am making my own picture, but it feels like Basquiat's artwork, or it's inspired by Basquiat. And so a big joke, especially in the elementary classroom, is if a student cannot figure out which picture is their own until they turn it over and look to find their name on the back, then that is the difference between copying and originality. And so if we look at the strategic approach for this specific challenge or scenario, which is very common, it is rooted in art criticism, which is a general practice that we do in all our grade levels. So the first would be to analyze and interpret. So we would identify a few elements and principles like colors and lines and shapes that Basquiat used in his own artwork. And then what kind of energy or feeling do we get from those things that he chose when he created his piece? And then comparing, so creating or finding two samples of artwork. It could be one that is inspired by Basquiat, maybe another student made it, or maybe you as a teacher made a copy, and one that looks exactly like Basquiat's, and kind of comparing the two. So have students compare which one is the inspiration one and identifying which one is the actual copy, and have them kind of articulate why using art and copyright vocabulary words. So using the difference between this is a copy and this is an inspiration, or this is the original, an original piece of artwork inspired by Basquiat versus this person copied Basquiat's art. And then planning and creating their own work. So have students decide which elements and principles, those lines, colors, shapes, that they want to use in their own Basquiat-inspired work, and think about how to represent the same kind of energy that they talked about from the original artist while making their own artwork and not a copy.
As we move out of Erin's scenario, one of the great resources that we found free within the Art of Education, directly tied to the conceptual bin talking about originality and copying, was this article. It's called The Great Artist Copy. And, you know, we think about the key takeaways. All artists copy, but the type of copying matters. It makes a difference. Thinking about that word inspiration and using a resource as a springboard and not a crutch, and also questioning or changing the message in that from your inspiration. And so when we were looking at this one and I was reading through this article, one of the things that really stuck out to me was that in the article, he talks about students drawing copyrighted characters like Pokemon versus drawing from a photograph. So they were questioning teachers, is it copying if they look at a photograph and draw the horse? Is it copying if they draw the Pokemon character, which is a copyrighted character? And a lot of teachers lean towards if a student wanted to draw a zebra, it would be acceptable to acquire a photograph. Some teachers went on to say, no, you can't just have one photograph. You need to have 3 photographs and pull inspiration from a combination of sources. So just thinking about that. Another thing that I found really inspiring from this bin particularly was our upcoming Art of Ed Now conference. The keynote speaker is Austin Kleon. He is the author of Steal Like an Artist, and this is kind of right up his alley. So we are looking forward to that coming up in January. And now we're going to turn over to reflection for this bin as well.
So again, if you're watching this, hit pause or just jot down those notes to come back to later. But what are some ways that you can help your students to understand the difference between copied and original ideas? And I really like that idea of leaning into that art criticism, understanding the colors of the lines, right, the shapes. How are we seeing this in what we want to borrow in making our own work? So, okay, great. Let's keep going. The next bin is legal and ethical sharing. Some of us in the chat said that this was the one that maybe we would want our most support in. And we see this in which students to now really fully understand that not all works can be freely used or shared, and that their sharing does require responsibility, especially online. You know, several of us on this call, we grew up without the internet, right? Now that has completely changed our worlds and the worlds of our students. So how do they understand how we respect ownership, even in digital spaces? And so in second grade, we're talking about how to explain how to share visual artworks fairly. And in fourth grade, it's identifying how to responsibly use online resources. And then in eighth grade, it is explaining how to share works legally and ethically in both digital and physical spaces, so that we are, again, talking about so much of what these students are interacting with in art in the digital platforms. And so the question that we got from the field was, well, what responsibilities do you have when posting or sharing digital images of art created by others? And, you know, I know teachers are going to post pictures from their students, and we're going to, oh, I really like this. I want to share it with you and show others about it. And so I think we are all guilty of the sharing. So, you know, the topics here as we lean a little bit more into that.
And Laura, I love how you kind of brought up, not that we're showing our age by any means, but the difference between what it is that we kind of experienced as being students and then now as being teachers, and how it's very different. We can't kind of really rely on what it is that when we were a student. I can't remember learning how to do a works cited page at the end of a book report when I had to go to the library until I was a big kid, until I was, you know, out of middle school or even into high school, when it was deemed important to do so, to give somebody credit. And now that we have so many, different opportunities at our fingertips, we're having to model that for our students. A scenario that, I kind of thought would be appropriate. And granted, this is for second grade, fourth grade, and eighth grade. And while this is aimed towards fourth grade, keep in mind that this scenario can be scaffolded up or down for any grade level. So this scenario is my fourth graders are designing a slide deck or a PowerPoint presentation to share their favorite art style. They will practice using a combination of their own art, the presentation app design features, and free content from the internet. Okay, and so as opposed to just use the clip art that is in the presentation, it is an expectation as a teacher that my students have to use all three of those types of work. And so the challenge is, how can I have students practice the legal and ethical way to responsibly use online resources, in addition to when they share their presentations, they're sharing it as well. So the first part is to differentiate. So the strategy is differentiate and cite or give credit. So the first part would be to differentiate. And I know that in one of the other scenarios, and maybe in another one that's going to follow, is we talk about kind of comparing, but making those very visual for students, especially in the art room, gives them it's a great way to go beyond a language barrier or misunderstanding, where they can actually see. So differentiating work between, this is my work, which I made it, it is free use for me to use, is versus a presentation app designs, which is free to use because it is part of the application that you're using. And then also online content that I have found, and whether it is pre-approved by my teacher from a free online source, or it has legal sources only. And then what do I do as far as citing or providing credit for that? So the first part is differentiate between those three. So they know those three categories, and then identify or for the teacher to note safe or free to use sources for them to go to. So we know we don't want to just let students kind of, free reign of the internet, right? We have that responsibility as their leaders. And then also for them to go in and then gather those images that are not their own, for that third category. And the last part is to establish credit. So require, as like I said, when we were kids, maybe we didn't have to have a work cited, or we didn't have to do that until we got much older. But now it is an expectation that a non-negotiable is adding credit and sourcing the work that's there, and also sourcing, giving yourself the credit as well, because that first category is my work. It is free for me to use, but I'm also giving myself credit as part of the resources used. So as we share, we're making sure that all artists, including ourselves, are getting credit.
Before we jump into the resource, I wanted to go back up. You can stay right there, but
okay.
I just wanted to reread that original question. What responsibilities do you have when posting or sharing digital images of art created by others? And I know that we're really focused on teaching students how to respond to that, but I want us to think about, how are we as teachers answering that question? What responsibilities do we have? Because that behavior that we model, students will rise to that expectation of in your classroom. So just thinking about all of the times that you as a teacher have shared artwork, are you citing whose artwork that is? As a best practice, I learned from another teacher one time, and it really just hit home with me. When presenting artwork from anyone else, they not only had the requirement to give the artist's name, but also to include the artist picture. And the reason they started doing that was because it empowered students to see themselves in those artists. And that really struck home with me. And that was something I started doing in my practices in my classroom. So just thought I would pass that along, because you're giving those kids that chance to be like, oh, I have similarities with that person. I can visualize now who they are, not just the artwork that they create. So as we look at the conceptual bin of legal and ethical sharing, we want to share with you this one, how to deal with student plagiarism in the online art room. And while this article focuses on the online art room, I will tell you so much of it applies directly to the in-person classroom as well. And just thinking about how can we teach students that the difference in unethical versus illegal. Turning in your friend's artwork as your own with their permission is unethical, but it is not illegal. Regardless, is it acceptable in my classroom? No. But we've got to set that expectation with students and sort of model those behaviors and those scenarios for them. So it's going to require teachers, to just be transparent and show students some of these examples before they ever happen, to have those proactive conversations. And then we are going to move into a moment of reflection.
So again, pause your video and reflect on how can you better assist your students to practice legal and ethical way to responsibly use online resources. So take a moment for yourselves on that. All right, and we will move into attribution and credit. So here we see wanting our students to be able to practice and understand how to give appropriate credit when using someone else's work, with the core idea being that crediting others is both an ethical obligation and a legal requirement, as students are then exploring what does it mean to get these or how do I make citations and gain permissions. And so in first grade, it is that explaining how and when to give credits to others, right? This is not my idea. I borrowed it from somebody else. Let me make sure that I'm giving that person's name. Citing artists correctly when utilizing or adapting their work in fifth grade. So we see the formality starting to come up here in fifth grade. And in advance, it's now we're looking at how do you gain the legal right to use another artist's work. And so it is, how do we ask for those permissions? So that question that we've gotten from the field on this is, well, why is attribution important in schoolwork, art, and digital spaces? And how do I even explain giving credit to artists to these young students? And again, we say we don't have to give them the legal jargon, but how can we get them talking about it?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so you'll notice as we kind of get more into these bins and understanding the details and nuances of each one of them, that some of them kind of overlap or kind of bleed into each other to make a little bit more of a cohesive understanding of what these concepts are. So for this scenario, we have a first grader is drawing a picture of a tiger with rainbow stripes. I asked her where she got the idea, and she shows me a picture from her book, and she blatantly says, I want mine to look exactly like that. And that is the best form of flattery, is that you want to have your work look exactly like somebody else's. And so the challenge is, how can I make this a teachable moment for the entire first grade class to learn how and when to give credit to an artist's work? And so this kind of makes the connection with something that Kacie had mentioned in the article, and the experience she had with a teacher, saying that giving our teachers or giving artists credit, having that picture of the artist with them. And so the more that we can make make it tangible that this is another person's work, another person's hard work that you are copying and saying is your own, or that's not, it's not your, that you're saying it's your original idea, is not fair. Just like if you had a ton of you did your hard work on something and somebody else said, I want mine to look like that, but it was your original idea. And so the strategic approach would be reference fairness. And then also, because we're in the art room, we're going to create our own too. So for reference, we would appreciate the image that we see in the book, and then we're going to identify the name of the illustrator in the book as the artist of the original piece of artwork. So this example could be that the artist is George Jenkins. So the illustrator, George Jenkins, we're going to establish ownership and fairness, and explain that this tiger is Mr. Jenkins' hard work. This was his idea first. And if we want to use his art, we would have to ask permission to copy it, and I don't have his phone number. So it's only fair that we can be inspired by his artwork and we can create our own. So we're going to practice discussing what we like about his rainbow tiger. And then because we're in art class, we're going to create our own different tigers inspired by things we like about Mr. Jenkins' illustration. And we can follow up having conversations of sharing, if we have a visitor come into the classroom, sharing the book and sharing the picture and giving credit to why we like this rainbow tiger, and giving credit to the illustrator, George Jenkins. So that way we practice giving credit to somebody else and appreciating their hard work and not copying it.
When we look at the resource available to you, I want us to think about, we're talking about the attribution and credit conceptual bin. So we've got how to steal students' attention with art heist and forgeries. So use examples of art heist as your hook to get that in. Connect forgeries to the fairness of giving artists credit for their hard work. Discuss scenarios where students can practice identifying artists, titles, dates, and where that art belongs. So I actually looked up to see if there were any famous North Carolina art forgeries or heists that had happened. There was one in 2024. Someone stole a 10-foot thumbtack sculpture valued at $50,000. They loaded it on top of a Jeep and drove off with it in Hickory, North Carolina. So thinking about some of those forgeries that are close to home that might hook students in, it was actually later returned, but returned damaged because it fell off their car in the middle of an intersection. And so just thinking about that, there's also a book called The Accidental Picasso Thief. That is a true story of a reverse heist that happened in North Carolina in 1969. A forklift operator accidentally took home a package from a factory. It turned out to have a Picasso painting inside, and then he got freaked out and hid it in a closet and didn't tell anybody until later his dad helped him anonymously return it, and like 2 weeks later it was stolen again because the mob had gotten word that he had it and they were after him. It's like a whole thing, but that happened right in North Carolina. So just thinking about what can you find that's relevant to your space or your area that might intrigue students into real life scenarios that credit that attribution and credit bin.
Amazing stories. Thank you for your research and digging those up. And I'm interested, so I want to go find out more about this. Absolutely. All right, so in your next reflection from this part of the webinar, how might you incorporate teaching your students how and when to give credit to an artist's work in an art making unit you already do? Because again, we're not trying to create new work for you. I know Brandon says he wants a whole podcast on that heist. That's our next webinar. Stay tuned. No, but anyway, so yes, how can you think about ways you're already doing work that's centered on ideas of other artists, right? How can you help your students to understand how to give credit that's appropriate? All right, let's go to our next bin. This is complex use. And so here we want our students to analyze that nuanced or emerging practices that challenge the traditional notions of ownership so that our students are thinking critically about new creative tools, things that we don't even know exist yet, right? That they might be forthcoming in their lifetime. Technology is changing so fast and rapidly. So what are these new creative tools and forms, and how are they intersecting with ethical and legal norms? And so in the accomplished honors course, this is where we have students making the comparisons between parody, adaptation, and artificial intelligence in relation to copyright and fair use. And so our question is, if an AI generates a picture based on a data set of existing art, who owns that copyright? Is it the AI? Is it the programmer? Or is it the user? And I think there had been that conversation about that monkey, right? Or isn't there a gorilla that was taking a photograph of himself smiling? Do you know the debate I'm talking about? Oh, we'll have to
Selfie.
pull it up and the selfie. Yeah, some animal took a picture of himself smiling as a selfie. And so the question is, well, who owns this? But anyway, I'm going to pitch it over to you guys because you have your own scenarios. So go ahead.
Your scenario sounds amazing. So I am actually designing this scenario. I designed this scenario because obviously we did not have AI when I was teaching elementary and middle school art, but I do have 2 teenagers that are in high school, and we know that AI is a big buzzword amongst teachers, and how we are and users, but how we are using AI to for good, right, and as a tool, but also understanding how to use it appropriately. And so while those the teachers in the core classrooms where students have to do a ton of writing, it's a tool that they have to kind of monitor a lot, but it's also happening in the art room too. And so the scenario that I have here is high school art students are practicing how to refine AI prompts to create an illustrative image to go with a haiku that they've written in language arts class. So we're kind of making that connection between something that is that they are founding or building off of to asking to design a piece of art for. So in this case, it's just a connection to the literacy classroom. So the goal is for them to practice refining their art, their AI prompt writing, to devise the most accurate AI-generated image representation of their poem. So essentially, if you boil it down, is how are students refining their AI prompt writing skills to create a piece of art that they wanted to turn out the way they wanted to turn out, this fine piece of artwork they want to have as the best representation of what's in their mind, right? So the challenge is, how can I ensure that my student best understands appropriate ownership and sharing of the images they design and AI creates for them? So essentially, they are asking a tool to create something for them, right? And so they're turning it in. That's what their assignment is to create this artwork. But who owns that work? Where is the creativity? On what level is the creativity? Who owns the creativity? So clarify ownership first. While students provide the AI instructions, they hold the responsibility of the instructions, of designing the question, of designing the prompts, what exactly that they want. The prompt could be something as simple as create a piece of artwork that has high contrast with black and white lines and shapes, right? They have to know what questions, art vocabulary to put in that prompt. And they hold the responsibility and can use images for educational purposes. Like I have put in this prompt for this, but because they did not manipulate the media or assemble the elements and principles together on their own to create that image, they cannot claim ownership of its creation. So they own the prompt writing, they own the design of the AI prompt, but they do not own the final image. So the second step, or the final step of this project, would be to note attribution. When posting, sharing, or including this artwork in a portfolio, they would need to include a disclaimer, such as the image was generated with, and then naming the AI tool based on my original writings of my haiku, or based on what my prompts are, or what my decisions are of what I wanted to ask. So we understand the difference between what you own as an instruction, giving the instruction, versus the creation, who created that piece.
So for the conceptual bin of complex use, we have a resource available to you, how to create ethically and responsible digital surrealism for AI for the K-12 art room. You know, we're thinking about teaching and that AI tools are trained by other people. Students may not realize that. AI may be new to them. It's new to a lot of us. And so just making sure they understand how AI even gains its knowledge would be helpful. Also, that have students credit both human artists and AI platforms. If, like Erin said, if that is going to be the platform that actually creates the work, make sure you're giving credit to that platform. And frame AI output as a starting point, but not a finished original artwork. So if they are going to, if that is the assignment, like in the example above, they would need to credit it appropriately. Or is that just the starting point for what then they are going to create? So just thinking about that. And then we're going to move over to your
Great.
next reflection.
Yeah, and so take a moment to reflect. How can you have your students investigate the ethical use of AI in their creation of art? So we do want to lean into these tools, right? We want students to understand how to interact with them. And of course, with that, then is this appropriate conversation of who owns it and how do you appropriately credit what was created by these tools? All right, so our last bin is ethical use. And here it is students consider not just what is legal, but what is right in creating and sharing work. And so I think Kacie, you'd given or somebody, one of you had said earlier, like somebody else could turn in somebody else's paper as their own, right? So, that's not, it's legal, but it's not ethical. And so ethics is not just about rule following, right? It involves judgment, integrity, and respect for the creators. So we see this in third grade, in which students are identifying works that can be used by everyone fairly. In seventh grade, they have to identify the legal and ethical issues in creating derivative work. And in intermediate, they're evaluating the ethics of making, producing, and distributing original and derivative art. And so our question, yes or no, well, what should you do if you're not sure whether you're allowed to even use a copyrighted work?
Right. So when we're talking about, doing what's right and not necessarily what is, following the rules, this is where we kind of also make that deeper connection where in the art room, we are helping to sculpt good humans by having them learn how to make good decisions and what's right and wrong, both in creating their work and then also in sharing their work when it comes to what is mine, what is original, what is a copy, what is inspiration. So all of those things, like I said, all of these bins kind of interweave together. And so for this scenario, we have my seventh graders are digitally creating a series of comic book characters inspired by popular superheroes. Okay, so they are choosing super popular superheroes that they know, but they are creating their own comic book series from inspiration. And so the challenge is, how can I guide them to create derivative work and decide which elements they can legally and ethically change, remix, or build on? Now, keep in mind that with derivative work, you need to have permission to be able to make those changes. And so sometimes, like I said, sometimes I do have George Jenkins' phone number, or I can call him and ask about rainbow tigers, and sometimes I can't. And so this is where we have to make decisions of what that looks like, and also using our vocabulary. So in this situation, or this strategic approach, we have differentiate, define, and then brainstorm. So while we, in these steps, we don't go to the finished product, we're just having this as an anticipatory set where we're talking at the very beginning of a project. So the first thing we're going to do is compare and differentiate between two examples, like the Basquiat one is that is clearly copied, and one new creation inspired by an original work. Visualizing clear differences between the derivative and the infringement. And then we're going to define key terms to use in conversation and practice. And as a teacher, we're going to use that when we're having conversations. We're going to drop those keywords in there like we use them casually, like we're talking with our buddies. And they're going to hope that they're going to use them casually as well, so that way they can use them more. So the difference between derivative, copyrighted, and ethical use. And then practice. We're going to provide a small set of copyrighted images and brainstorm how we can create legal and ethical derivative work. Change colors, costumes, backstories, mix elements with multiple characters, do mashups, and add new settings or actions. And then we're going to discuss and reflect as a class questions, or we're going to question originality. And then we're also going to talk about the ethical confidence that we have of posting these new characters online. So it's not necessarily a rule or a law, but when we talk about ethical use and we're talking about what's right and wrong, we're talking about ethically, how confident do I feel about sharing this original work? Is it original enough? So having those conversations before we even begin creating our final original piece. Kacie?
Yeah. When we're talking about ethical use, we've got a resource available to you, How to Guide Students to be Responsible Digital Citizens in the Art Room. Some of the key takeaways include, teaching students how to tell what is free for everyone, using strategies to track images back to their original sources, making, citing, and crediting an expectation for all digital assignments, and then clearly define plagiarism versus reinterpretation in digital work. So we teach our students to be good citizens, and that starts at a really young age. But one thing we've got to really think about for this generation is we have to also teach them how to be good digital citizens. And what does that look like? How is that different? And the way we're going to find it best is to set clear expectations, especially when it comes to the use of digital images, and where to find them and how to credit them. And then we'll move into your reflection.
Right. So how can you guide your students to create derivative art and deciding on which elements they can legally and ethically change, remix, or build on? So hopefully you'll have some time to reflect on that. All right, well, we're going to get into some more resources because I know that this is just the tip of the iceberg for what Art of Education has available to you. And so I'm going to keep going with them and let them tell you a little bit more about not only their free versions, but some of the other packages that they offer to districts and teachers.
Perfect. Thank you. This QR code is going to get you access to all of today's resources. It's actually going to also get you access to an extra resource. We are providing for you, and I'm going to leave it up there while I talk, and then we'll go to it. We're providing for you a sample of a piece from Flex Curriculum so that you can see, and it is around copyright, appropriation, and fair use. If you want to go ahead and move over to the next one. So Flex Curriculum is our K through 12 state standard aligned curriculum. It is lesson plans, videos, resources, and assessments. You tell it what state you teach in, and it aligns everything to those state standards for you. We have tons of lessons like inspiration versus appropriation or our remix lesson. And so along with all of the free resources that we've talked about earlier in the webinar, we're also going to provide for you the resource that you see here around copyright appropriation and fair use. There you go.
And that's me. So just additional solutions that we have here at the Art of Education. We tout that we support our teachers through all stages of their career, inside the classroom and outside the classroom when you are trying to be a human, but also being an art teacher at heart and wanting to connect with your community and better yourselves as professionals. And so just a couple of different ways that we connect that directly relate to the content of today's webinar. The Art of Ed community is a free online space where we have art teachers that kind of connect and ask questions and learn from each other, and that is a free resource there. And then also, as Kacie had mentioned, the Flex Curriculum, we have over 3,000 resources all aligned to those state standards, just like the free sample that you'll get when you scan that QR code. Pro is our professional learning platform with on-demand learning. We do have what we call Pro Packs, which are kind of like module-based little bundles of professional learning that are teacher-focused, that focus on copyright in the art room and the importance of creating original work. And that's those Pro Packs are designed to be methods-based to where you can use them immediately in the classroom. And then also we are an accredited university so the Art of Education University offers 2 grad programs. And if you go to the next slide, we have a brand new course that can be taken online. It is a total of 8 weeks, 3 credit hours, grad credit hours, and it is AI and art education. And so this course, just in a nutshell, if you look at those different objectives that are definitely relevant to today's content of learning how to implement different strategies, but also for you to better understand what AI and art education looks like in the field, because we are constantly changing in the world of art education, and this is a definitely relevant course that I think anybody could benefit from, but definitely anybody that's interested in today's webinar.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thank you, Kacie, for dropping some of those links and resources into the chat for our viewers. Again, you'll have access to this deck as it will be in the PD catalog for everyone to click on and see all the slides. And so was there anything more, or we're ready to move into closing?
I think
all right. So So moving into closing, we're a little short on time, but if anybody does have a pressing question, we'll let you go ahead and get that ready for the chat. We didn't have any questions come in while we were presenting, so take a moment and start to write those down. But meanwhile, I'm just going to continue to wrap up and to say again, we hope that this presentation helps support your knowledge in ways that you are going to help your students with these 6 conceptual bins. And again, for more information, continue to view some of our other Copyright Unlocked webinars that are found in the PD catalog, including the one from Copyright and Creativity, which had that selfie of the chimpanzee or whatever he was. So if you want more on that one, that's where it is. And take a moment to reflect, what is something that you want to keep doing? We know that you are already doing so much, so many great things. You are likely already having these conversations with students. So we want to acknowledge that, right? What are some of the things that you are already doing that you want to keep on doing? What is something that maybe you just might need to change a little bit, right? It doesn't have to be this, massive new thing. It's just, I just need to tweak this by adding something. And then what do you want to start doing? What is something that maybe you haven't done up to this point that this conversation is now helping you to realize, I really should start implementing this into my instructional practice? So take a moment and complete that for your final closing out of your reflection journal. And this is where you will find the reflection survey. This is, again, go.ncdpi.gov/ncdpi arts ed PD survey. And this survey houses all of our professional development opportunities. And so you would need to make sure that you are clicking the appropriate session that you are watching today. And then again, uploading your link. Make sure that your Google Share permissions are set to anyone can view. And upon the completion of your submission, you should be receiving your CEU survey in an email. So make sure that your email address is spelled correctly. And if you have any questions, as always, to follow up with us. And so we will be able to add that to your chat as well momentarily, because I just want to go on for a second to say thank you very much to Kacie and to Erin. The amount of knowledge and the resources you both have contributed to this presentation has just made this such an enriching experience for me personally. I know for our field, I could not have done this without you, and I'm so thankful. And to Brandon for really kicking off the conversation with you all and getting this started. And so thank you for being here with us. This has just been absolutely phenomenal, and I hope that our viewers have appreciated the time with you. So let me see if Brandon is adding this session, because it may not be in the thing. Are there any other questions that maybe have come up while we are wrapping up?
We did have a question about where do we find the official definitions regarding the copyright vocabulary, and I was sharing that copyright.gov is the official source for all things copyright.
And we have added all of these official definitions in our glossaries for our unpacking standards, if I'm not mistaken, and they are also found in our unpacking documents. So we've got our glossary resource as well as our K-12 based by discipline and grade level of the unpacking the standard objective resources available on our AE Hub. So other places that you can go. Well, I want to thank you. I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen momentarily here and go back so I can include that link in the chat for us. And escape this. But thank you guys again for being here with us. And if you need to know, our hub is available to everybody. And so I'll type that one in first. That is our https go.ncdpi.gov AE-hub. And here you will find all amazing resources, including the professional development catalog, all of our vertical alignment documents, our glossaries, our standards. So we hope that you will take some time, because there may be things that you find valuable, even if joining us from another state. And again, if you needed that survey link, I will copy and paste that here. I should have had that already for you, so sorry. That is, come on, there we go. And so thank you again for joining us. Deb, thank you also for the work that you've done in helping us. Deb is also joining us from Art of Education. And so again, appreciate your time, and have a great holiday and good night, everybody. We'll stay on if there's any other questions. We'll be the last to leave, but thank you.